Oprah Winfrey, once the undisputed queen of daytime television, billionaire extraordinaire, has indeed fallen from grace in the eyes of more and more people. In this video, we're going to take a look at the latest controversies that have enveloped this once unrivaled star, how her embracing of wokeness and racial identity politics is garnering some of the most severe criticism and denunciation, and how the growing chorus of Oprah-despisers appears to have just gotten started. You're not going to want to miss this. Greetings, everyone, patrons all across the globe. Dr. Steve here with you. Great to be with you as always. If you're new to our channel, we analyze current events and analyze some super awesome conservative trends so we can all live in the present in light of even better things to come. So if you haven't already done so, you know what to do. Make sure to smack that bell and subscribe button. It'll be an absolute privilege to have you as a regular part of this channel where each and every day we together celebrate the inevitable collapse of left-wing globalism and the unstoppable rise of a new conservative age. It doesn't get better than that, does it? Before we dive in here, let's give a huge shout out to the sponsor of this video, and that's the makers of this awesome motion detector ultra bright solar night light. You can install it anywhere because it's wireless, and you never need to worry about buying batteries because it's solar powered with a high powered battery storage pack. It's equipped with motion detectors, and it becomes an entertainment light for the patio and the barbecue with just the click of a button. And those motion detectors, they actually offer extremely effective deterrents against burglars. And best of all, you don't have to spend a fortune for any of it. If you click on the link below right now, you'll save 52% as well as free shipping. How do you like that? What can be better, right? So don't wait. Click on that link below or visit nightsolarlight.com and bring its light to the dark spaces in your home today. All right, gang, look. I just think in many respects, we're seeing what's amounting to nothing short of a very real fall, a fall from grace, as it were, from one of America's, well, without question, most significant and celebrated celebrities, Oprah Winfrey. And now I'm talking about not just specifically about one of the biggest controversies that's gripped our nation of late and her involvement in that, but this is just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the controversies that she's been involved with for the past several years. So let's just start with her latest endorsement of a very controversial book for her highly successful book club. The book is called Caste, C-A-S-T-E. And what the author reportedly argues is that the United States is systematically akin to oppressive political and economic systems that we find, for example, in India's traditional caste system. So in this sense, then, the United States appropriates race and defines race in relation to a social hierarchy, with whites on the top and African Americans confined to the bottom, deliberately, of this hierarchy. And the book goes on to make comparisons to the American social order, not simply to the caste system of India, but also to Nazi Germany. And Oprah is pushing this. Not only does she claim that it was one of the most important books she's ever read, but she's actually calling on literally all of humanity to read this book as well. Now, this isn't the first time that Oprah got into a bit of a pickle with regard to rather strange picks for her book club. You may remember the so-called American Dirt controversy. It was an interesting controversy, analytically speaking, that is, that Oprah got herself into. She pushed big time a book entitled American Dirt. It was a fictional account of a Mexican migrant who went into the United States illegally. She's being chased by drug cartels and the like. But the controversy surrounded the fact that the book was written by a so-called European-born woman living in the United States who had no ties whatsoever to the Mexican migrant experience. And a lot of critics were angered by what they considered this author's use of offensive Latino stereotypes, right? You live by PC, you die by PC, I guess. And so Oprah was forced to backtrack on the book. And in effect, she had to admit that she was totally blind to these racial stereotypes herself. But the damage was already done, and she was widely accused of having helped perpetuate what liberal critics saw as a blatant and obvious example of opportunistic cultural appropriation on the part of this author. And yet, Oprah has no problem lecturing the rest of us on our supposed insensitivity towards racial stereotypes and our unconscious or deliberate biases or whatever. And this is all coming on the heels of a very clear pivot of late for Oprah, who's appearing very much inclined to embracing the new wokeness, the new racial narrative that has pervaded our national discourse since the death of George Floyd. So shortly after the riots broke out, Oprah hosted an episode on her Apple TV Plus series where she pushed relentlessly this notion of white privilege. And when guests came on pointing out, the rather inconvenient fact that not all white people have power. There are plenty of white people who are underprivileged, right? Living in adverse conditions. Hardly the paragon of white privilege when you're underprivileged. Even though that was pointed out to Oprah, she nevertheless responded saying that, and I'm quoting her, there are white people who are not as powerful as the system of white people. Here's that term, the caste system that's been put in place. But they still, no matter where they are on the rung or the ladder of success, they still have their whiteness. You still have your whiteness. That's what the term white privilege is. It means that whiteness still gives you an advantage no matter, close quote. Now, obviously, she was mercilessly brutalized for that comment. Here you have a woman that's worth over $2 billion. And not only does she have the goal of lecturing the rest of us on privilege, or white privilege for that matter, she has the goal of the lectures about poor people benefiting from white privilege, the underprivileged benefiting from privilege, right? She doesn't seem to give a rip about their poverty-stricken lives. She's been so blinded to their sufferings and adversities by this racial stereotype. And then, of course, not to be outdone, Oprah's gotten deeply involved in the very controversial 1619 project. It's a so-called history project that doesn't, as it turns out, have any historians involved with it. It's being pushed by the so-called journalists at the New York Times. So it's a journalistic project. It's based on the premise that American history actually began in 1619, which is cited as the date that slaves first made it to North America. By the way, that date is wrong. A number of historians have pointed out that slaves arrived in North America in the 1500s. But then again, this is a propaganda project. It's not intended for historical accuracy. And so what the 1619 project does is it interprets everything following this. All the historical events studied in American history are studied through the lens of slavery. So it's a highly Marxist conception of history that develops in terms of the clash between oppressor and oppressed. But as it turns out, this is just the tip of the iceberg of Oprah Winfrey and her history of scandals. But before we get into that, we've got something for you podcast fans out there. We recently launched our brand new Turley Talks podcast, which tens of thousands of you have been downloading. Cannot thank you enough, right? And we're excited to share with you that we are now the 23rd most downloaded podcast for daily news on Apple Podcasts. We jumped 20 slots just in the last couple of weeks. It's really amazing. It's all because of you. We were in the top 40 a couple of weeks back. Now, because of you, we're almost in the top 20. But you can help us actually become the #1 conservative news and commentary podcast by simply clicking on the link down below in the pinned comment section and signing up to download our new podcast twice a day, every day. You can now take Turley Talks anywhere you go. So make sure to click on that link below and sign up for our Turley Talks podcast. And let's together make it to #1. All right, now let's get into Oprah's history of scandal, shall we? When there was all this buzz over whether she would run for president, do you remember? And have you noticed that buzz has completely died down of late? Isn't that interesting? Well, one of the reasons for that is that the editors over at the Washington Post wrote articles basically saying, careful what you wish for. And they thought there was just simply too much baggage in Oprah's history that would come back to haunt her if she were to run for president. Do you remember her $40 million gift to poor South African girls in what was called the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Academy for Girls? It opened in 2007. It was replete with a yoga studio, beauty salon, all that. In literally just a matter of months after opening, the dorm matron was arrested and accused of sexually abusing at least half a dozen 7th and 8th graders. Now, of course, Oprah threw her under the bus, right? She threw the dorm matron under the bus. She accused the school administration of covering up the issue. She had absolutely nothing to do with it. It was all her fault. She would seek, full justice and all that. But then a couple of years later, several girls were expelled after accusations were made that they tried to have sexual relationship with their fellow students. And then the original charges against that dorm matron began to unravel. And she was acquitted by a jury because the girls' testimonies were totally self-contradictory and not credible. And then the dorm matron turned around and sued Oprah Winfrey for defamation, which forced Oprah to settle out of court. which of course cost her, I'm sure, a very large sum of money. But if that weren't bad enough, you actually have Oprah mixed up with the whole Harvey Weinstein scandal. At the height of the hashtag Me Too movement, of which Oprah has anointed herself as a major champion and advocate, critics actually started pushing back against her by revealing this bizarre relationship she had with Weinstein. Now, we have to understand that according to multiple reports, everyone who was anyone in Hollywood knew about Harvey Weinstein and what he was doing to women, okay? Everybody knew. And yet it was tolerated. It was hush-hushed. And one of the major personalities that tolerated Weinstein appears to have been Oprah Winfrey. And this is becoming increasingly acknowledged by celebrities. So, for example, the rap star Snoop Dogg recently slammed Oprah in a scathing Instagram post for widely circulated photos of her smiling and laughing with Weinstein years before his now infamous sexual assault allegations were made public. A number of outlets like Variety magazine have reported on celebrities actually testifying that they know that Oprah knew about Weinstein's predatory behavior towards young women, and yet she, in effect, covered it up. There's actually a petition out there online for Oprah to publicly disavow Weinstein, especially in light of the speech she gave at the Golden Globes, which celebrated female empowerment. That's when everybody was like, Oprah needs to run for president and all that. But a number of others were like, no, this just proves what kind of hypocrite she is. And that's when you began to see all these photos of Oprah with Weinstein. The most infamous one is, of course, her kissing his ear at some gala or event. Moreover, you also had one of Bill Clinton's alleged sexual abuse victims, right? Juanita Broaddrick. She came out and accused Oprah of blatant hypocrisy after a Golden Globe speech, since Oprah did everything she could not only to rehabilitate Bill's image on her television show in the 2000s, but Oprah, of course, went on to endorse Hillary Clinton in 2016. So there are many, many critics who see Winfrey as a hypocritical spokesperson for the Me Too movement, to put that mildly. But circling back to her controversies over race, I don't know if you remember an interview that she gave to the BBC a few years back, where she made the now infamous comment that old racists have to die. She was promoting one of her films when she was asked about race and racism by the interviewer. And she said this, quote, "As long as people can be judged by the color of their skin, the problem is not solved. There are still generations of people, older people, who were born and bred and marinated in racism, that prejudice and racism, and they just have to die," close quote. And while such comments were certainly celebrated by many on the left, such as at Jezebel.com, a champion Oprah for joining what they call the long line of people waiting for old racists to die, as the Washington Post points out, many on the right accused her of pushing cheap identity politics for no other reason than to just promote her movie that was coming out. So whatever may have been said about Oprah Winfrey in the past in terms of what a positive force she's been for so many, it really does appear increasingly clear that not only has that past been significantly checkered with very severe controversies, but her present pivot towards racial politics is promising an ever more controversial future. Now, before you go, make sure to like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to my channel. And you will definitely want to check out my latest video. I just uploaded it on how the ambush of the 2 police officers in LA will destroy the far left as support for BLM implodes. You're not going to want to miss that. So make sure to click on the link, and I will see you over there. God bless.